John Worthington. John's going to talk to you about the future of technology and
Thanks. Yeah, I guess it's a sign that I'm getting old when I start looking at the list of things I've done, because it always seems to be way longer. At the point in time when I was starting off, I was really a frustrated, poor musician, which I'm sure some of you can relate with. Everyone here okay? All right, great. So my problem was music technology of any sort was really expensive. To give you an idea, the Yamaha CS80, which just came out in a $179 plug-in, it sounds really good, was a $20,000 synthesizer. And I actually ended up working for one of the first Guitar Center stores just so I could play with the synthesizer. That was the only way to get my hands on that stuff. And so at that point in time, the thing that made the most sense in the world was I was good with computers. You'd start working on trying to sort of do this stuff with computers, find ways to save money. So that led to a lot of the early work with MIDI. Because MIDI meant I didn't need to have a big tape deck. Pro Tools came about the same way. Big analog tape decks were really expensive, and it was sort of the natural outgrowth of samplers. And QuickTime was a little bit different story. I'm going to go through some of this just to give you a little perspective on how my mind works for when I get into the other stuff. Long about 1988, George Harrison went into a recording studio, and he happened to notice that there was a Macintosh there. And they were using it for doing some sample editing and some sequencing. And he remembered this deal that Apple Corps, which was the company the Beatles started to handle the publishing, had made with Apple Computer back in 1980. And back in those days, you have to remember that Apple Corps was this big company everyone had heard of. And Apple Computer was this little startup that no one had heard of. And it turns out that in the United Kingdom, the trademark category for personal computers was the same category for stereos. So the way trademarks work, you get the right to use a name in a particular product category. And this meant that Apple Computer, in fact, couldn't call themselves Apple Computer in the United Kingdom and in some parts of Europe. So they signed this sort of stupid deal, looking back on it, that said they wouldn't build a computer specifically for music reproduction, right? Because in those days, if a computer made sound at all, it was this, cheap little synthesizer, or maybe the beeps, you've heard coming out when you hit a keyboard, hit the wrong keystroke. So that went along fine, so George Harrison sees this Macintosh and realized that here's this Apple computer being used to make music. So their lawyers call Apple lawyers, and the next thing you know, they're suing Apple Computer for $330 million, which was just an absurd amount of money. And this goes to emphasize the point that, I can't emphasize enough about music business, which is, if anyone ever has to sue anyone, the lawyers are the only people who make money. So unless you're planning to go on to law school, you just ought to avoid the whole, getting sued thing. Because it just doesn't pay, even if you're on the winning end. And if Apple Corps had asked for $3 million or $10 million or, buy a copy of a Beatles CD to stick in every computer, Apple probably would have done it. But $330 million was, a lot of money. And they went ahead and decided to fight it. And the first thing they did was they killed every project inside of Apple that had anything to do with music or sound. So the MIDI manager went on hold, the sound manager went on hold. I had the great pleasure of getting this big bound book of testimony from the Royal High Court in London, that they pointed out copies of all this stuff that sits around forever in the Tower of London. And here in like 90-point font is the splash screen from the MIDI manager with my name, which could be sort of terrifying when you're, 27, 28, and going, oh man, I am in big trouble. So what they ended up doing with me and my team is saying, audio and video are kind of the same thing. They both play back over time. They have to be synchronized. Video isn't very interesting if it doesn't have audio with it. So we'll put those guys on video projects. Now at that point in time, I knew very little about video. I was a musician who had learned recording technology and sort of prepped along with what the state of the art was, because it was all getting developed around me in the Bay Area. And here I was doing video stuff. So we had a project that was doing a plug-in card that would let you work with analog video on a Macintosh. The guys in the system software group had this project that was playing back frames of animation really fast on a computer. And then there were guys in the research lab who were doing something. We were never quite sure what. But they had this grand plan that at one point we were going to unify like all media types together in this unified language so you could talk about it all as the same thing. And Bruce Leak, who is the person running the system software effort, myself realized that we could in fact take over all the media projects at Apple if we decided to work together. And so we did, and we were having a grand time, playing back video on the computer, starting to capture stuff, doing what turned into QuickTime. And there was this crazy vice president at Apple who announced a media project called QuickTime. They had no people working on it. But he, stomped his fist at a sales meeting and said, we will have this media architecture in a year. So QuickTime really came out of them taking our work and deciding that it was the thing he had promised, even though there wasn't anything sort of planned that way. And that's really the history of most of the developments in music technology. DigiDesign didn't get started to make recording easier. It got started because the two founders of DigiDesign had a band, and they had bought an EMU drum emulator, and they thought the sound sucked. So Peter Gocher and Evan Brooks started thinking, gee, could we change the sounds in the drum chips? Evan was a good engineer. They figured out a way to do it, and all of a sudden people started buying their drum chips. Well, then they needed a way to edit the samples on the computer, and that's where Sound Designer came from. And a lot of the stuff I was doing with timing work in MIDI found its way into Studio Vision, and because Opcode was across the parking lot from DigiDesign, and they were about a mile from my house, we'd go have dinner every night. At a certain point, everyone decided, it'd be kind of cool if you could do your MIDI and audio stuff together. But it was all sort of this combination of I don't want to say accidents, because it was maybe a little more planned than that, but it was just people who, were passionate about what they were doing and happened to all be in the same area and decided to work together on it. And at that point in time, there wasn't enough money in media technology that any of the companies worried about it. It'd be kind of hard to do it now because all the companies are paranoid about people working together, and they're paranoid about their projects. But fortunately, late 80s, wonderful time, all this stuff got done. And the end result of it is what you have now, where instead of needing an expensive 24-track tape machine, any personal computer you can go buy will give you 24 tracks of CD quality audio. And to sort of put in perspective how miraculous that is, DigiDesign had a product called Sound Tools, which was the precursor to Pro Tools. And this did 2 tracks of CD quality audio. 2 tracks, $15,000, and we had to hand test the disk drives that went out with it. Because out of the pool of really fast disk drives, some were faster than others, and you needed to have these special disk drives to make it work. As opposed to now, where you can go down to, CompUSA, spend $49, and get a drive fast enough for doing, 24, 32 tracks of audio. You've got, things like GarageBand that, comes free with a Macintosh that gives you more studio horsepower than, was in the original Synclaviers, which were $250,000. So it's, it's a pretty great time in one sense because the technology has removed one of the big constraints in making music. And that is all this recording gear being expensive. Right? Not a big deal now. Now, the thing that's gone along with it that's maybe not so good is the rest of the recording industry is, rapidly descending into chaos. You've got, the RIAA complaining that piracy has eaten up record sales and there's some truth to that, although they're skewing their numbers. You've got a record industry that's become incredibly focused on overnight success. So, if you're lucky enough to get someone to pick up your work and it comes out and it doesn't sell 1 million copies in the first 3-4 months, maybe you'll get to play on the next disc, maybe not, but probably you'll get dropped. So the whole economics of things have changed. What's really cool about it from my point of view, which, is this, poor musician who was building tools because I couldn't afford to buy them, is the do-it-yourself stuff's become cheaper and easier than ever, right? The internet, you can sell your own CDs, you can make your own CDs, you can build up a fan base. If you're smart about how you put all these pieces together, you don't need a big record label. The only people who need a big record label are the maybe 300 acts that, are going to actively get pushed. And it may not even be that many. It might be, 2 or 3 per label. So I actually think it's a great time to be in the music business, and it's a great time to be an independent musician because of this technology. You just have to, at the risk of paraphrasing a bad apple, think different. So that stuff's all kind of cool that you can get your stuff out there, and I think exactly where the business is sort of going is back to the future, right? It used to be that bands put out singles, right? The whole recording industry up until the 70s really was driven off of singles. People released singles, people bought singles. There were actually multiple copies of the same song out on singles at the same time. Something you'd sort of never see today, or very rarely. And then everything switched to, these big albums, and it switched to there being so much money in the business that people could take 1 year, 2 years to record an album. You heard all these comments like Fleetwood Mac or Crosby, Stills and Nash in those days talking about the studio as their instrument. And it sounds like a good thing, but it sort of wasn't. I was fortunate enough to be in LA at the studio when Fleetwood Mac was recording Tusk. And we got to know the engineer who was working in there. They had 40 tracks of guitar solo for one to tune. Now obviously there's not 40 tracks layered together of guitar solo anywhere on the record. But they'd come in and Lindsay play a different guitar solo every night. And then, the next day, because at that point none of them could stand to be in the studio at the same time, Stevie Nicks would come and say, I don't like any of that stuff, take it off. They put on another 24-track tape, they tracked her stuff, and then, Mick Fleetwood would come in and none of the stuff was working with what he had. And so they literally had stacks and stacks a 2-inch 24-track tape, you know, God only knows how much money that they couldn't even wait through the mix because you can't keep track of all of it. So I think the fact that, you know, people, the record business isn't throwing money at people is good. It forces a little discipline because people have the computers now. You can do your own stuff. And with the internet, you finally have a good way to distribute stuff. Now, I imagine everyone here has downloaded music off the internet. It's all right, you can admit it. I feel like turning any names. Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. Has anyone found new music, bands you didn't know about? A couple of you owning up to it? You know, that's a great thing, because it used to be that the way you found out about new bands was stuff getting played on the radio, right? You had this great filter, which was, you know, a disc jockey who was hopefully into the same kinds of music you were into, which is why you were listening to their station. And they turn you on to something cool, and you say, oh, that's great. And maybe they even played the whole album side, right? All that's gone away with you know, all the radio stations being owned by a small number of companies that, you know, program them out of a central location. So the good news is with the internet, it's easy to put all your music up. You know, it's easy to sell CDs. And even better, it's easy to give away music. Because the reality is, unless you sell, oh, it used to be gold, it's probably platinum these days, you aren't going to make any money off of recording anyway at a major label. It just isn't going to happen. And I'm sure at, you know, some point they'll take you through all the depressing math about it. But trust me, it's mathematically impossible to make money on a major label record deal without selling 1 million copies. Fortunately, you know, if you're getting paid for every disc you sell at a show and you're, you know, clearing $10 on that, you know, that's a lot of money. So, you know, I know bands that are, you know, quite comfortably getting by selling 40, 50,000 copies of their CDs off the internet as they tour, and, you know, they're making a nice living. And they have complete control of their music and what they're doing with it. They don't have, you know, anyone telling them, you know, it really would sound better if you put some loops here. And we have a new vision for you if we get rid of your lead singer and, you know, bring on this other person who looks better on video. You know, none of that stuff. So I think, you know, there's a huge amount of opportunity for the people who are musicians who are trying to get out and sell their music. How many of you are looking at sort of the back-end studio side of things for careers? Think about that. A lot of you? Yeah, so there's good news and bad news there too, right? And the sort of bad news is, you know, the days of someone going in and spending $200 an hour in the studio are over. Just sort of isn't happening. When I moved here 5 years ago, I had this grand vision that I was going to move to New Orleans. I was going to open a recording studio, and it was all going to be really cool. And then I realized I could go rent time in a Pro Tools studio for $45 an hour, which isn't enough to actually pay off a Pro Tools HD system. So what I ended up doing was developing a very different model for Lakefront Digital. And that is, we have a Pro Tools system that we use for mixing and mastering. And we just added a station with Logic 7 and some FireWire interfaces. So the time-consuming part of making a CD, for me at least, is mixing and mastering. That's where all the magic happens. And if you're disciplined about your recording process, you know, and only recording the stuff that you need a live room for, in a place with a good live room, you can do that fairly cheap at $45 an hour. So it didn't make me very popular because I was one of the first guys in town to walk around with my little Firewire drive and go into the studio, and we'd record for 2 days. And then I'd hand the engineer the drive and say, okay, can you copy all that stuff over here? And I'd get the long excuse about how Pro Tools was complicated and you really didn't want to do that. So I'd get my files and I could go home and mix and master it, and I was saving 3/4 of the budget. So the value to you as an engineer, as a recording person, is going to be, what's in your ears and what's in your head. And it's not about the facilities anymore. Now, granted, it's nice if you get to the point where you can afford a big old console, and you can go out and buy some of the big expensive old microphones. And Peter Gocher, who was one of the founders of DigiDesign, has done this. He basically built a 3,500 square foot recording studio under his house, complete with a load-in ramp into the basement, and has 120 tracks of Pro Tools, and probably $100,000 worth of microphones now for gear, and they use it to record their old high school band. Because all those guys who started off together are still playing music together. And so, they make very nice, like, basement rock recordings, which is a good way to look at that stuff. But they don't run out the studio because you can't make any money running out the studio. So I think the future of, John was asking about the future of music. It's really the future of media technology, because everything that's happening with audio has happened to video, right? It just happens 10 years later. And that was part of the lesson of QuickTime, that, you've got stuff now where it's easy to, a DV camera is, $700, $800. A really good one's $2,000. An HDV camera, which will give you high def video, is maybe $3,000. You load that stuff into the computer on the hard drive, it seamlessly integrates with all the audio stuff you're doing, and boom, you've got production quality that, a network TV station would have killed for 10 years ago. Not much money. The big difference is, do you have the talent and knowledge to do anything with it? And part of that is, knowing actually how to push the gear as far as you can go. And part of it's really developing a personal style in a creative sense, right? Because people are going to come to you because you can do something special for them. In the old days, you had a recording engineer that was separate from the producer, right? Producers knew what they wanted on the audio, and they knew how to sort of manage the process. It was a big budget, they were making sure everyone got paid, the time got booked, the right amount of tape got caught, all the union stuff was taken care of, and the recording engineer worried about where to put the microphones, how to set that stuff up. It was all very critical because you had 1, 2, 4 mics. You didn't have a lot of things with direct outs. Now all that's sort of merged together, which is, bad for the big facilities where they're trying to have people do those separate jobs. But, good for you as an individual if you've got a strong creative vision. Because as a producer, you can control your recording, and you can offer a little more value in the whole process. Same thing starting to happen with video. It used to be people who did visual effects and editing were separate. Now that's all folding together. I know some people in LA working on low-budget music videos where they're actually doing that as part of the recording process, right? So all that sort of in-studio, cool B-roll footage that they do in the music videos, it's getting shot by people at the recording studio or people in the band as they put their projects together. And actually the 9 Inch Nails DVD got done this way. right? These guys had a bunch of the little mini DV cameras. Everyone shot video when they were out on tour. They combined it with some professional stuff, shot from the front of the house, and then they took it, cut it together in Final Cut, and did all the DVD production in DVD Studio Pro. And when they knew they had exactly what they wanted, then they went out and get some people to help them clean it up. But it meant that, you know, a band was able to do a whole lot of the creative process, which meant it reflected what they wanted to do. It meant they weren't taking a huge advance from a record label, which, you know, they were going to pay back at pennies on every CD sold. And it gave them just a you know, huge amount of leverage in terms of being able to create another thing that they could generate revenue off of. So to me, you know, the future of music, the future of media is learning how to put all this stuff together well with the tools that are available on the desktop, learning what stuff you don't know and finding people who do it. You know, knowing those people that, you know, when you need a great guitar track, you know a great guitar player, and, you know, he owes you because you've done some editing work for him, or however the trades work out. And, you know, that lets you get a lot of creative expression out with the sort of total cost of the thing being fairly low. You know, because there's no one putting money into this stuff these days. If you think about it, a big record label did 3 things. Well, 4 things in the early days, because they did artist development. But they don't really do that now. So, you know, if you haven't built up a following, and you don't know how to book clubs and get people out there, they don't want to talk to you. They provided what? Project financing, right? You didn't have to come up with the money to do the recording. They provided duplication. Once you turned in your master discs, they did everything else. And, you know, shiny little jewel boxes, shrink wrapped, would show up, and they provided distribution. Well, between the cost of the equipment going down, the internet coming around, and things like, you know, cheap CD and DVD burning, and even Write Once stuff, you don't need those 3 things anymore. You just need to, you know, sort of develop enough business skills that you can go out and do that. And, you know, do some of the hard work. And, you know, the Write Once CD stuff, these CD printers, are pretty incredible. Have you guys seen these? So I bought this CD printer for about DVD printer for about $2,000. And what it does is I can put 50 discs at a time in it. The little robot arm, it's sort of fun to watch because it has a robot arm. And it'll pick up the disc, put it in the burner. When it's done, put it on top of a 4800 DPI inkjet printer, print the face. Full photo quality, drop it in the hopper. So, you know, this is great for us because we'll do something like a jazz quartet CD. And it's just not economical to print less than 1,000 copies. So up front, you're sort of $1,500. If it costs you nothing to record it, nothing to you know, engineer it or pay the musicians, you're still out $1,500 because you have to get the things made. And, you know, anyone want to guess like how long it takes to sell 1,000 copies of a free jazz CD? Because I couldn't tell you because I still have 600 of them in my closet. That starts to add up. Whereas now, you know, we can do the Write Once CDs. We duplicate them as we need them. And it's great. Anything that's an interesting recording project, we can do. I shot some video back at Jazz Fest for this singer-songwriter named Lynn Drury. And the original idea was that we were going to shoot some video for her to have for a press kit. And it looked really good. The Chateau is this wonderful room. They have all the theater lighting stuff down. A couple of other guys showed up to tape the show because they just like going out and videotaping shows, and she allowed it. So I went around and grabbed everyone's videotape and dumped the thing into Final Cut, and we ended up with a nice looking DVD, which she's now able to sell at gigs. We're selling on the internet. It cost us nothing in production costs, other than, you know, the $50 in tape. And we're printing them as we need them. So it's a kind of project that, you know, for myself as a businessman, I wouldn't have sunk $3,000 into to get DVDs duplicated, because we haven't tried to sell a DVD before, and certainly not a concert DVD for an artist who's really, you know, only known in town. But, you know, $50 and some of my time, yeah, you know, that's an easy deal. I've made that back already. So you know, we're just going to see this whole thing continuing to sort of coalesce, which means there's going to be an added burden on all of you, because it's not just being a recording engineer or a musician. It's now being a recording engineer, a musician, a producer, a videographer, a video editor, a web designer, a record label executive, right? You need to figure out how to manage all that. But it means, you know, you get to keep $10 a copy instead of, you know, 80 cents, which is sort of good math. And the story gets even better with downloads, right? Because right now you can put the audio out. You know, iTunes is selling a lot of music. So are all the other services. You know, that costs you nothing. You don't even have to make the discs. Now, you know, iTunes and the download stuff's in a little bit of a weird space, because you have the same exact problem with iTunes that you would have with any major distribution system. Right, you could go to CD Baby, they'll put your stuff up on iTunes, they take 9% of what you get, which is about 60, you get 60 cents, they take 9% of that. You can try and deal with Apple directly, which they're starting to do now, but they bury the stuff. So if someone doesn't know the name of the band or the name of the project, you know, they aren't going to find it on iTunes, because you aren't going to be on the front page. You aren't going to make Apple's email list, any of that stuff. But if you start developing a fan base, you do a good website, you can, you know, you can start selling the downloads yourself. It works pretty well. And one of the keys to this, and I'll give you one of my best web tricks. This is really, really important. A lot of people laugh at having their photos taken with famous people. Right? You get the, oh, I'm not going to be one of those guys to, you know, do that. If you play with someone important, if you do an engineering project with someone important, get your photo taken with them and put it up on your website, and make sure you label it. Right? So as an example, my partner in the record label, Jeff Albert, played this show with the Funk Brothers in town. So there was this big corporate party. They flew in the Funk Brothers, who were, you know, the original Motown rhythm section, along with Chaka Khan and Jonah Osborne, and Tom Scott was the music director. Big deal. He played trombone on it. He got these photos, labeled it. Now if you go into Google and type in Funk Brothers, you know, it's not the first listing, but like, you know, 10, 12 down, his name will show up. Because they're just going out and looking for places where these keywords are. So now all of a sudden, someone who went to go look for the Funk Brothers is finding out about Jeff Albert and, you know, getting steered to records that are on my record label. It didn't cost me anything. It's one of those great little magical tricks of the internet. So if the opportunity ever arises, don't be bashful about getting the photo and posting stuff like that on the internet.
John,
Yeah.
we have about 5 minutes left.
All right.
Let me take a couple of questions.
Sure.
Anybody got a question?
think the post-production industry is going to be like in 5 or 10 years? Do you think it's going to maybe do the same route as home recording?
Yeah, the question was, what do I think the post-production industry is going to do? Is that going to go the same way as home recording? And the short answer is it already has. Right, as soon as the Avid system came out, there were all these video editors that were freed from working in big post houses. And so there are a lot of TV shows now even. They get cut in someone's bedroom. And there's a guy with a bedroom studio doing the audio stuff. And then it all comes together on a certain night. And, we're seeing that more and more. I did some work once upon a time for Industrial Light and Magic, and a bunch of the guys there working on films have spun out and they have their own little visual effects companies. And it's become very commonplace on a movie to have, 30, 40 visual effects companies working on it because they just get jammed up. So if they know you're good, you have the right equipment, they'll give you a shot. And by shot, I don't mean a chance, I mean actually one of the effect shots in the film. And people bring that stuff back in on their hard drives. And, it's happening more and more and more, and there's no question that for anything other than probably advertising where they're on very short time frames, that's going to continue to happen. Anyone else? I know I rambled about a lot of stuff. There's got to be some questions. Yeah.
Before you were talking about being able to do and handle a lot of different aspects of the music business, such as being able to build your own website, being your own producer, sound engineer. What's the best way for kids like us to get out there and to learn about all that? Like, how do we find out about all these different aspects of what's going on?
All right. So the question was basically, how do you learn to do the long, scary list of skills I mentioned? And I think part of it is just by doing that stuff. If there are a lot of people, musicians who will go out and get a website done. It's always easier to modify a site than build it from scratch. One of the ways I learned web design was by looking at sites I liked. And if you go up in the menu, you can find view source. And you can look at all the HTML source for the page. And so it's a great way to say, oh, that looks really cool. How did they do that? With the audio stuff, the tools are there on your computer. You can start doing that. The business end is enough of it's wide open now because you don't have to deal with the established distribution record store because they aren't going to talk to you anyway. Yeah. Well, there's two answers to that. The question was, how did we get the sound quality right on the DVD we made? And the first answer is we didn't, because we made a sort of crummy mistake when we were recording, which was the idea was we were going to record the audio into the cameras. And we were going to get 1 feed off the board. The DV camera will record 16-bit, 48 kilohertz audio. And then we just have the wild audio off the camera mics or, the room sound. Well, the guy who got the audio off the board actually got the thing pre-fader. And what that means is all the background tracks were louder than the lead singer, which she objected to, and I can't quite blame her much. So we ended up using the camera audio, but that meant I had 3 different cameras with 3 separate audio tracks, no time code between them. And that sort of puzzled me for a while. And what I ended up doing was setting markers at the start of the first vocal line in each song. So I'd go through, I'd step the video until I could see her start to open her mouth. And then I'd go ahead and I'd take all the other camera tracks and get them to that same spot. And then I'd play all the audio tracks together and see if I could hear any phasing. Right? Because if they aren't lined up time-wise, you're going to get this weird echo, out of sync sound. So then I slipped the audio in Pro Tools until it was all lined up. And at that point, I knew all the video was lined up in sync. I could just pick whichever audio track sounded best at that point in time and cut the 3 video tracks to it.
So that we should actually close. How about a big round of applause